did not die on the cross, and either he was Jesus or he was Judas. But they cannot both be right. They can, however, both be wrong. And that is the problem when you start insisting that things written in ancient documents must be believed without any question. There is actually a lot of questioning to be done about the origins of the Quran. There is very little documentary evidence for about 200 years. Christianity is bad enough because there is nothing about Christianity that dates from earlier than about 40 to 60 years after the crucifixion. And we know how difficult it is to be certain about events that happened 20, 30 years ago. People have ferocious arguments about the Second World War, about all the various other wars that have happened since. So when you're making claims with the kind of certainty we have seen from this side of the table about historical events, when even the history of the Quran is shrouded in quite a lot of mystery, and when you threaten people with serious sanctions if they try and do research on it, that, to me, does not say very much about your desire to get to grips with reality. It was not permitted to do serious historical research on the Bible until about the end of the 18th century. You could still be sent to prison in Britain for denying the Trinity as late as about 1812. But eventually in the 19th century, serious higher criticism, as it was called, of the Bible appeared. And now people are very much less certain that everything said in the Old and New Testaments is actually true in every respect, put it mildly. The Catholic Church didn't allow that until about 1941, and Islam does not allow it still. Islamic scholars have found their careers seriously threatened if they really tried to get to grips with some of the mysteries of the early versions of the Quran and so forth. So let's turn now to, how am I doing for time? About halfway? Sorry? Oh, you didn't, that's right, all right. I didn't hear the halfway mark. Let's turn very quickly then to reality as is current. A few years ago I got into some discussion with Dr. Majid Katme, who describes himself as the spokesman for the Islamic Medical Association of the United Kingdom on medical ethics. And I was interested about Islam's line on abortion. And he wrote to me saying, because obviously one of the issues in abortion is when does the fetus become human? When does the fetus gain the kind of status where its destruction becomes increasingly important? And he said, at 6, I'm quoting him directly, at 6 to 7 weeks of pregnancy, the soul is breathed in the body of the fetus. Divine human life starts when the embryo turns into a fetus. Okay, so that's relatively clear. It's not a human being until it turns into a fetus. At this critical stage, it's absolutely forbidden to interfere with this new sacred life. One can call the fetus here a persona, human and divine. However, there's wide Muslim opinion in the Muslim world, considered by many Muslim scholars in the past. And some of them say that ensoulment occurs 120 days after conception. Personally, I and other Muslims do not agree with this view. It's based on a wrong Arabic interpretation of one saying of the Prophet. And then he said, this important saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when 42 nights have passed over the nutfa, the fertilized egg, Allah sends an angel to it who shapes it and makes its hearing, vision, skin, flesh and bones. And then he says, O Lord, is it male or female? And your Lord decides what he wishes and the angel records it. He gives the reference in the hadith. So there it is. Forget all that ludicrous stuff about Y chromosomes and gender. It's Allah what does it. Maybe someone should ask the Muslim Council of Great Britain if they really want someone like that advising them on medical matters. Yes, I will finish there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Colin. Is there any argument on this side that you particularly want to address from these two gentlemen? Am I right?
Yeah, well, I'll just go with the conversation to myself then, and we'll start off.
Yeah.
So basically, I think maybe my colleague is used to debating perhaps some certain Christians and what have you. I like to think that perhaps we're a slightly different breed in terms of our approach or philosophical approach. I don't think he addressed actually what I said, and I think strawman my argument. For example, I'll give you an example. So I never said everything that begins to exist has a cause. I never used that because you could always say, well, how do you know everything does begin to exist? And that would require empirical verification, which is that's why I never said it in the first place. I merely posited that ultimately, and I don't know where this ultimately is. I just said ultimately there will be a cause. I don't know how old the universe is. Maybe we've been through a couple, 6 or 7 big bangs and big crunches until getting to this point. Of course, the universe is everything that exists. I merely said that at some point it has to start somewhere, because an infinite regress would mean there would be no change, no creation, nothing. And the same for things like what matter is composed of. I never made an assumption that it is quantum vacuum energy or superstrings, which a lot of scientists now doubt the idea of superstring theory, a bit fantastical. But I just posit those two, like, say whatever you want. The question can always be asked, what are they made out of? And what are they made out of? If their attributes come from what they're made out of, for example, then what can they be made out of? Until you get to the point where there must be something that's fundamental, a fundamental substratum that supports all reality's existence. And if it's fundamental and it's necessary, then it wouldn't be limited and it would be self-sufficient, because it wouldn't require anything prior to it or underneath it or further more fundamental than itself. So these are the kind of the arguments I made, but I guess just to kind of reframe this discussion in terms of what I mean by atheism, or why I mentioned the term atheism. You're right, atheism isn't a belief, but I posited that it carries a necessary corollary, something attached to it, which is, if you don't believe in God's existence, not that you may be just, it's just your default. No, if you don't believe in God's existence, that means that your worldview does not require you to posit God to explain things. And I really posited that reality imposes certain problems if you want to keep God out of that discussion, because ultimately you can't explain cause, matter, specificity, or limited and finite things. And my explanation isn't one where I know stuff because I've observed it, is that God is the only explanation to avoid self-contradictions. And that's pretty much it. Like I'm saying, if we take 2 and we add 2, I know that this will equal 4, because taking the premises, the conclusion must follow. So likewise, I know that the premises are the existence of finite things. That's the premises. So I know that eventually at some point, it must follow that there must be a beginning point, a creating point, a start point, and a fundamental substratum that's supporting all things. Even though I don't know where that is, where the boundary of that is. That's my argument.
Could you put that into deductive form?
Into deductive form? Well,
so 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a deductive form. It's a premise and a conclusion. It's not deductive form to say there is matter and matter must have a beginning. What's the deductive argument there?
Well, for example, it's the avoidance of contradiction. So because I just explain. So if I was to say 2 plus 2 equals 6, right, and 6 meaning what we conventionally understand 6 to be, we'd know that was wrong because of contradiction. So my point was that if you were to say, well, before this point in time, there was an infinite number of moments or movements, I would say we would never reach this point in time because it would be a contradiction.
I know what he's trying to get at.
It's one of the longest questions I've ever been asked. I think you know what I'm saying.
You're trying to say, you want us to say everything that begins to exist has a cause.
No, that's not necessarily the kalam. That's not what I'm going for. All I'm saying is that the reason why you can say that 2 plus 2 equals 6 is false is because you're right, it leads to a logical contradiction. The reason for that is because it's essentially a logically valid argument with premises and conclusions, and you can identify exactly how it contradicts. You can put it into a truth table and show that it's false. 2 plus 2 equals 4? Yes.
It's a tautology though. 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Well, precisely. It's a tautology, and you can prove that deductively. Mm-hmm. But there's no can you highlight precisely what the premises are and the conclusions are of your argument here, so
Does
you
it
can
does
do
it
it
need
in
to
the
be
same way?
outlined like that? Because the
It
thing
does if you're going to say that it leads to contradictions if you don't agree with the conclusion.
Well, it does, because
You need to formalise
an
it.
infinite regress is basically saying that there was no beginning, and yet we're explaining, or there was no cause, and we're explaining the cause of things, or we're explaining the beginning of things, or we're explaining movement. So there was no first movement, but there is movement. So it creates a contradiction in terms, because in essence, we rely on a pre-existing state or pre-existing conditions of movement, and yet ultimately you're saying there is no beginning to this pre-existing thing. There's just an eternal chain, that there is no start to it, and therefore it's the same as saying nothing actually
I'm trying to get you
exists.
to prove that we require
Right, so
one.
I've got one statement that can kind of summarize it for you. Anything susceptible to addition or subtraction cannot be infinite.
Okay.
Okay, so it doesn't need to be a deductive three-stage deduction.
Well, no,
It can
that
be-
makes it a
Right, so no, I'm
that's
just giving
fine.
one statement. What he's saying is that if you have an infinite thing and you add to it, then there's the absurdity of adding to an infinite physical quantitative thing. So you'd have to disprove that statement. Now we've made the statement, anything susceptible to addition or subtraction cannot be infinite.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for you to prove your infinite regress, if you wanted to prove it, you have to prove, or you have to show how it's demonstrably possible for something to have infinity as a quality, as well as addition and subtraction there as well.
No, I don't.
So then you can't really make any claim.
I don't know, but I'm not making a claim. That's the thing.
So then why are we having this discussion?
Because I'm opposing your claims.
Well, you can't oppose
Your
it.
claim is that it requires it, and I'm just asking you why that's the
I'm
case.
saying anything that is
the logical form, the idea that it is logically necessary to have causation, or that there can't
No,
be.
we didn't say anything
there,
about causation.
There can't be an infinite regress.
No, I've just said what I've said.
This
Can we just have a final statement from you and from you?
Yeah.
Can
Just
I have
the,
my-
the,
can
the
I have my
statement.
two
Sorry,
minutes?
apologise. The statement I made
the
was that
idea-
anything susceptible to addition or subtraction cannot be quantitatively infinite.
Yes,
you have to.
according-
If
according to
you're
laws-
rejecting that, you have to disprove that. How is it physically, mathematically, or otherwise? How is it possible to have a quantifiable infinite which is susceptible to addition or subtraction? That's all you have to do.
It's another issue of burden of proof. It's not on me to prove that.
Well, I've just made the claim.
It's false. It's you to prove that's true, and you failed to do so.
Okay, I'll give you an example,
And
right?
if you'll allow me to answer the question,
ahead.
the
Can
answer
we just
is
leave it after this one? Yeah.
Yeah.
the answer is that you're right. Like, these things are required
Okay.
according to laws of logic and physics that are predicated on the existence of the universe. And we're talking about the universe.
Why is
coming
it
into
predicated on the
existence.
existence of the universe?
Because
Can you prove it?
well, no.
Okay, so why are you
But
making a claim? It's an active claim.
It's a possibility, right?
No, it's an active claim, which is.
And it's a
It's not possibility.
It's possibly
Do
true.
you know why it's not a
And
possibility?
if it's possibly true,
No, it's not possible true.
why is it not possible?
Because if the universe is a possible existence, then it cannot explain the existence of other possible existences.
If there is a necessary
Did you get that? Do you understand that? Point?
yes, I'm asking you a question in return. If there is a
No,
necessary
but can you address that first?
If this is what I'm trying to do with
Yeah.
the question. If there is a necessary being or occurrence, and that entails another,
Which is what you admit.
and that entails
Yeah.
another occurrence.
No, it doesn't entail.
And if it does,
No, it doesn't work like
if
that.
I may just, I think the confusion is, firstly, I don't think all things require putting into a logical syllogisms. I don't
Yes.
think it's necessary.
they do if you're going to say they're
I'm
a
saying that.
contradiction.
It does when you're making contrary propositions. You don't. Doesn't a sentence could say that this sentence is false. It creates a contradiction within the sentence without it being a logical syllogism.
Yeah, but again,
So
that is logically
I'm
false.
merely pointing out that there are ultimately only two possibilities
Yes.
to basically anything that you might observe which is finite, limited, and what have you, which is
Yeah.
either it was the result of something more fundamental than it, or something that is prior to it. And if you ask, well, what was prior to it, anything, or what is more fundamental to anything, either it's something that's like itself, as in something finite, limited as well, or something not the case, not finite and not limited. So I'm saying that if we go down the pathway of just constantly insisting on there's a continual chain prior to this existence of finite, limited things, nothing would exist, because that would cause an infinite regress fallacy, and thereby the contradiction is manifest. As opposed to ultimately at some point saying, well, actually, you know what? At some point, I don't know where, but at some point there was a beginning, or there was something that was not finite, whereby it doesn't have limitations. And just to kind of justify to you, limitations requires explanation. Something that doesn't have limitations doesn't require explanation, because there's no limits for it to be, there's nothing to create its limits for it to be explained by something else.
No, it still
So,
requires explanation.
Let's leave
no,
this one.
because
Yeah.
what
No,
we're
absolutely.
Okay,
Okay.
We're
okay.
getting tangled up. Colin,
Yeah.
do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I want to make the very old, simple observation that if you say God created it all, the next obvious question, of course, is who created God? And
Colin,
nobody has given a very satisfactory
just one-
opinion. No, please let me finish.
Yeah,
Let
sorry.
me finish.
Sorry, apologies.
And the second one is, as I say, you are talking the language of certainty. What we have learned in the course of my lifetime is that the origins of the universe have been pushed further and further back in time. It's a fascinating study. I don't pretend to understand more than the average man in the street about it. But to say that we clearly understand the nature of creation seems to me extremely arrogant, and to pretend that you can speak with certainty about something like that, I think is, to put it mildly, not justified.
Well, I think it's a little arrogant to actually dismiss what we actually said, because we never actually claimed that we know every tiny particle in this universe, or how big it is, or where it began. We never actually said that. So it shows that you weren't listening. I'm just saying
that you did.
I'm just saying that it shows that you weren't listening to what we were saying, and some people might say that's arrogant too. What I'm saying is very simply this: creation or causation or whatever you want to call it is to limit something, to define its limitation. Like when you draw a circle, you're drawing a limitation. So limitations require explanation. But if something has no limitation, then there's nothing that requires it to be determined, because it has there's no boundaries that exist in it. It is fundamentally unlimited.
But
That's why we say it doesn't
you
require
can't just
creation.
posit a necessary being and say it doesn't require any
no,
explanation.
we're not
because it's
positing
necessary.
I didn't say necessary, I said
But that's the
because
opposite of limited.
unlimited. No, because limitations require explanation, right? Not lack thereof. Right?
And limitation as opposed to what? What's
As
the
opposed
opposition
to
there?
not being limited.
And what is
Having no
something that's
limitations
not
and so on.
limited?
Well,
It's
well,
necessary, because if it's not necessary, then it's limited.
What's your definition of necessary? Because you keep using it incorrectly. What's your understanding of necessary existence?
Well, you were talking about contingent things. It's
No,
the opposite of that. So,
So
something
can
that
can you give a
so
definition?
something that cannot have been differently. That cannot
Okay,
not
cannot
have
be
existed,
differently,
for
and there's no
instance,
explanation for it
yes. What,
outside of itself.
Well, I suppose so.
Right,
yes,
right.
but
And
you'd
okay,
have
so can you tell us how there can be a world with no necessary existence?
well, you said we're living in a world of possible, or you said that we have to claim that we're living in a world of possible existences.
Do you agree that there could be
Nobody's claimed that.
Do you accept that there is a necessary existence?
I would say that yes.
Then that's God.
But that doesn't have to be God.
Debate over. Thank you
It
very
does
much.
not- no,
because
that does not have to be God. I'm sorry,
No,
it does not
that's
have to
our
be
that's
God.
our understanding of God.
It does not have to be God.
Yeah, for us, a necessary existence is something which is perfect. Couldn't be any other way. Explains everything else. That's our definition of
It
God.
explains everything else.
Because it's necessary, it couldn't be any other way. All
it
contingent.
couldn't have been any other way.
All
That's got no
contingent
explanatory power.
Alex, all contingent things depend upon it. Yes.
Give me an example of a contingent thing.
This cup,
How was it contingent?
because it could have otherwise not been in existence.
Do you know you're speaking to a determinist?
Pardon?
Do you know you're speaking to
Yeah.
a
Okay. So where did
determinist?
determinism
So
come from?
if
You said in your thing. Sorry.
what determined it?
Yeah.
if let me ask you a question. It's
Go
might
ahead.
seem isolated, but it will make sense.
Go ahead.
If P entails Q
Go
and
ahead.
P is necessary,
Yes.
is Q necessary?
No.
It's not.
No. No, it's not. It doesn't have to be. If necessary,
Right, so-
hold on. Let me explain why. What we're doing here is we've said that these dependent contingent things,
As you're defining them,
do you accept that this cup could have otherwise not been in existence?
no.
So, okay,
That's what determinism is.
Well, hold on. So you believe in the determinism?
Yes.
And you said in your speech, in your thing, a universe from nothing, you said that determinism comes from the necessary existence.
Are you talking about the contingency debate with
48
Justin Riley?
minutes, yes. 48 minutes in, you said that one necessarily leads from the other. In other words, determinism leads from necessary existence. Yes or no?
Sorry, say that again.
You said
Determinism leads.
determinism leads from necessary existence.
Okay, I think we were talking about a different thing when
No,
we were
no, no.
talking
You
about
said
necessary
this, and I can show it 48 minutes into the video.
Yes, I said that sentence, but I meant a
All right,
different
so
thing by
no,
necessary
hold on.
existence.
So you said the universe was necessary
This
existence.
can't be a semantic point scoring exercise. I
It's
meant
not.
something different by what you're
No
talking
problem.
about.
But you said this. You said
Definitions matter.
You said determinism comes from the necessary existence.
What did I mean by that? I mean,
You-
I
okay,
require
I'll tell
the
you what you
context
meant,
of the
because I
conversation to know
remember
what I was actually
I
meaning by
just
those
listened to this
terms.
2 days ago. The guy asked you, is the universe, would you agree with Bertrand Russell that the universe just is? Yeah? And you replied and said, yeah, the fact that the universe is necessary existence, I would agree with that in the first instance. And then he said, how would that tie in with determinism? You then said, determinism follows from, it's that which follows, determinism follows from the necessary existence.
Right,
Which
I know what you're
do you
talking
remember?
about. I was the person I was debating with, a guy called Cameron Bertuzzi, he
Yes.
was making the case for the contingency argument. And
Right.
he was saying that there are contingent things in the universe, and therefore he was using that to reason that there's a God. And I said that if that were the case,
Yes.
that necessary existence, the
Yes.
determinism would follow from that. I was making
Perfect.
the case.
Okay, so
I didn't
agree
say
with
that
you.
it does exist.
Listen, Alex,
I didn't say that it does exist.
We agree with you on that point. So this is the thing. You agree with us on more points than you think you agree with us on. You believe in a necessary existence, which explains everything else.
No, necessary existence. Be careful.
You said a necessary existence. Are you retracting it?
I said that
Are you retracting it?
the universe, there's not one unified necessary existence.
But you
all
said
stems.
that the universe was a necessary.
The
So are you
universe
retracting that?
The universe follows a necessary causal chain.
Okay, so no, you said, hold on, you said the universe is a necessary existence, and then you said determinism follows from that. Now I'm saying that
Okay,
you
how about this?
accept-
If I said that and I meant what you think I meant by
Yes.
that, then yes, I retract it. But I
So
don't
you
think
retract
that-
it?
But I don't think that's
Do you
what
know,
I
I
meant.
think what it is, Alex, is that you
But
keep...
people can go and look
No,
up for
Alex, I'll
themselves.
tell you
You're
what-
very good at making arguments against things I used to believe in.
Okay,
But let's
so
talk
you
about
used to
things
believe in
that
it
we're
because, okay, now it's perfect.
Guys, we're not on speaker's corner.
Okay.
No, 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 no.
Turn it down a bit, right? Argument, counter.
No, no, it's
Yes.
important, guys, because if you're changing your
Can I
argument
have
now...
fine by
an
me.
answer? Can I have an answer
Yeah,
to
you're
my
changing it
question
because
about
now you've
who
been cornered. That's
created
the only
God?
reason why you've changed your argument.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll do that.
I respond to, so
Who
the,
created God? Colin Brewer's argument.
yeah, well, we have to actually ask the question, why does anything need creation in the first place? Right? It's a more fundamental question, yeah? So, I mean, I could take this club, but sometimes I just take a stone or something and I say, how do you know that this actually thing was created or required creation? So if this thing was, let's say, eternal or let's say uncreated, then why is it in its particular shape, form, and so on and so forth that it didn't choose? If something was uncreated and nothing determined its limitations, then it wouldn't have limitations, which is my point. So therefore, it's kind of ridiculous to argue that God requires creation when he has no limits that require defined by anything to be defined by or determined by something else. And that's why we know that anything is created is only because it has limitations.
How long do you think God's been around for?
Eternity.
Well, okay, what I'll say is that God is outside of time, so there's no pre-existent time before him. Right, he's the beginning.
How do you know?
But you know what?
a necessary
I just want to kind of just
You're
pause
making
and
a
rewind something that
statement.
you mentioned in your presentation. I just want to just briefly touch on it before we touch anything else, which is you said that Islam is terrified of people professing atheism, right? Again, I think that I don't know what experience you've had maybe with from reading European history books, but I suppose you should read books from about Mesopotamia and Islamic
I quoted
civilization.
the experience
The
of
Prophet
a
Muhammad,
current
sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if I may just finish, I'll let you respond. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had a famous debate with a Bedouin atheist, right? There was no intolerance there. The Bedouin atheist actually became Muslim, but there was no intolerance just because the guy initially professed to be atheist. Abu Hanifa, famous classical scholar in medieval Iraq, Baghdad actually, had public open-air debates with atheists. Presumably there's atheists who were living in Baghdad at the time to actually be invited to open-air debates, and no one killed them or was intolerant to them at all whatsoever. And when you say, oh, Islam is terrified of atheists, I just want to say something. You're not special. We encounter polytheists, we encounter Christian Trinitarians, we encounter Zoroastrians throughout our history, and from our perspective, you're all arguing exactly the same thing, which is somehow the finite thing is also infinite and eternal, and we don't really see you as different. Actually, you're just another let's say just not a flavor of ice cream that we are basically encountering. So don't make yourself out to be more special than you are from our perspective. And as for the issue of tolerance of atheists, I think you should question your founders of your very ideology which pervades the West, liberalism. John Locke, in his Letter on Toleration, argued that you should tolerate different Christian sects, Protestants
That's
basically,
right.
but not atheists, because you can't trust what they say. They don't believe in any higher moral value other than maybe what is expedient. Rousseau made also the same argument, and some people say that under the current, you could say, atheistic idea as opposed to the natural rights arguments of John Locke, but the Benthamite arguments of utilitarianism. Really, morality is only based on expediency, and then people's rights are based on whether it's expedient to the state to even tolerate your rights. So now this is not related to the debate itself, but the guy brought it up, and it's really disingenuous to bring up in that kind of debate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, I mean, are you suggesting that someone like Socrates was a deeply immoral man?
No, I'm not saying it. I'm saying John Locke is...
You seem to be implying...
No. John Locke said that you can't trust atheists. He didn't say that they are necessarily by default
The difference is that the things which our worldview are based upon, which are the philosophies of these men, we can say that those areas of their philosophies were wrong. John Locke said some pretty egregious things.
You're nihilist. How can you say anything's
the
right or
difference
wrong?
is, we'll get to that. The difference is...
No, you can't say that you're wrong.
No,
I'm not going to grant you that.
I think I actually
I'm not
can.
going to grant you that. You don't believe in objective morality.
The difference is that you can't do the same thing.
No, you can't do it at all.
When there is something immoral,
You don't believe in objective
when there is
morality.
something immoral in the basis, when there is something immoral that comes from somebody who founded the worldview that we believe in, and something else unrelatedly that he said that no longer applies was wrong.
Can you prove it's immoral?
We can say that we disagree with what
you
he
prove
had to
it's
say.
immoral on your worldview?
We can say that we disagree what he had to.
You're making an active claim. So
you
can
can't do the same thing.
You're making an active
When
claim.
there's immoralities in the Quran,
Right.
you can't make the same. Look, we have just allowed you to speak, and there were many times I could have interjected and asked you similar questions, and you're making a two-quoque fallacy, and you're smart enough to know it. You can't just turn around and say that you're a
Just answer the
hypocrite
question,
for
please.
being a moral nihilist, especially since I'm not one anymore.
Oh, you've changed your mind now.
Yes,
So you
quite
retract that
publicly
statement
so.
as well?
What statement?
The ones that you said you're a moral nihilist.
What do you think moral subjectivism meant to me and means to me? What do you think
I don't know what it means
to
to
be-
you, man. That's a subjective
so
statement.
you're saying you can't say this because you're a moral subjectivist and a moral nihilist.
Yeah, you're making a moral claim,
What do you
you're
think that
passing moral
means?
judgment.
What is moral subjectivism?
Yeah, so you don't have objective morality. It's not fixed. It's not true or false. It's, despite human thoughts or convictions, that morality is true. So it's only first person subjective.
Let's get a succinct answer to that.
Yeah,
statement
my
on
question,
this
can I ask
side.
one question, then you can answer it?
Yeah, go.
My question is, he's made it very clear on his public profile that this man does not believe in objective morality. Why and how can you say this in one breath and then passing moral judgments which are based on liberalism? Can you explain how atheism accounts for that or how it does it?
As I say, that's a two-quoque fallacy.
It's not a
It was
two-quoque fallacy.
interjected. Let him answer.